Welcome to Mr. Spector's channel. This content is based on reality. Part 1: The Hotel Night Auditor. This incident occurred approximately 1 year ago, but there is still not a moment when my mind isn't occupied by it. I was working the night shift at a small motel back then. The experience was so utterly shocking that I am still terrified. I don't know what that man's purpose was or why he was there, and the thought of how long it took me to realize his unauthorized presence still makes me feel sick. Our hotel had 3 floors and only 40 rooms in total. It wasn't a bustling place. Usually, on weekday nights, only 10 to 15 rooms were occupied. My working hours were from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. My time was mostly spent in silence and boredom, which suited me fine. I would sit behind the counter, handle paperwork, occasionally check the cameras, and, during quiet moments, browse on my phone. The lobby was small, featuring the reception desk, a sitting area with a television, and a few vending machines. Behind the desk, there was a small office that had a window through which I could monitor the entire lobby area. The entrance doors locked automatically at night, so guests had to ring a bell for me to grant entry with the push of a button. Normally, nothing noteworthy happened after midnight, except for the occasional late-arriving guest. However, on this particular night, around 11 o'clock, a man entered, and everything about him still bothers me. He rang the bell, and I opened the door for him. He appeared to be middle-aged, tall, and somewhat thin, wearing a baseball cap and carrying a backpack. He approached the desk and asked if we had a room available for the night. I confirmed and stated the price. He nodded and presented his credit card. I processed it, the transaction was successful, and I handed him the key card for room 214 on the 2nd floor. I distinctly remember that before he left, he gave me a long, fixed stare, longer than usual. His expression was blank and intense, and his eyes stayed on mine for perhaps 3 or 4 seconds after I gave him the key. Then, he turned and headed towards the elevator. While his behavior at first didn't scream danger, it was unsettling enough to stick in my memory. After that, I returned to my chair and fiddled with my phone for a while. Close to midnight, I looked up and saw him back in the lobby. He didn't come to the desk, he just walked past me and sat down in the lounge area. The television was off, but he was seated facing it. I guessed he might be suffering from insomnia. Sometimes guests spend time in the lobby, so I wasn't overly concerned. But after half an hour, I noticed he was sitting in the exact same position, doing absolutely nothing. He wasn't busy with his phone or reading anything, nor was he dozing. He was just staring directly at the black television screen. I got up once to get water from the vending machine. As I walked through the lobby, I sensed his head turn, monitoring my entire path. Without looking directly at him, I could feel the weight of his gaze until I returned behind the counter. This gave me a profound sense of unease. Around 1 a.m., out of sheer boredom, I was checking the reservation system on the computer when I noticed something strange. I pulled up the list of occupied rooms and saw that room 214 was listed as vacant. I muttered, "What is this?" and checked again, since I had just processed the man an hour ago. I thought I might have made a mistake, so I checked the registration reports. There was no record of him. No name, no charge, nothing. Then I went to the transaction page to ensure his card had been registered earlier, but there was no payment recorded. I remember being utterly perplexed because I swore I swiped his card and heard the successful beep, yet there was no information in the system. I immediately picked up the phone and called room 214. It rang about 10 times, but no one answered. Then I checked the key card entry report, which shows whether that room door has been opened that night. Nothing was shown. No one had entered the room. It was here that I realized he had never gone to his room after taking the key. I looked over to the lounge area, and he was there, still sitting and staring at the television, which was off. A dreadful feeling started to build in my chest. I sat down and struggled to figure out what I should do. While part of my mind suggested a system glitch, the fact that the room had no entry record and no payment was registered clearly indicated that he hadn't been admitted at all. I watched him for another 15 minutes. Around 1:30 a.m., I approached him and asked, "Is everything all right?" He turned his head and looked at me with a vacant expression, stating he just couldn't sleep. Then he turned his face back towards the television. I nodded and returned to my desk, but my hands were shaking. Around 2 a.m., I noticed he was no longer on the sofa. My heart sank instantly because I hadn't seen him leave the lobby. I scanned the area and finally saw him standing at the end of the corridor near the restrooms, partly hidden in the darkness. He was just standing motionlessly. Pretending to work on the computer, I kept glancing at him. He stood there for a while, then slowly returned and sat back down in the lounge area, as if nothing had happened. I called my manager and explained the situation. Sounding tired, he told me to just keep an eye on him and call the police if he did anything threatening. I remember hanging up the phone and thinking that the situation itself felt threatening enough, but I didn't know what else to do. After that, I checked the security cameras. I saw him on the camera for the first-floor hallway. He walked the entire length of the hall, stood at the end, paused for a few minutes, and then came back. Later, he entered the stairwell and stayed there for about 10 minutes. I don't know what he was doing in there. Every time I looked up from the computer, he was somewhere else, near the vending machines, by the elevators, and once just standing in a corner of the lobby where the light didn't reach well. He was always staring. By 3:30 a.m., I couldn't bear it anymore, so I called the non-emergency police line and explained that there was a man in the hotel I didn't believe was a guest. They said they would send someone. While waiting, I noticed he had moved again, this time closer to the reception desk. He was standing about 5 meters from me, just watching me. He didn't blink much and certainly didn't talk. He was just staring, as if he had a staring problem. I pretended to be typing something on the computer, but I was so scared I could barely breathe. Around 3:50 a.m., the front door chime rang. I thought it might be the police, but it was another guest returning late. I quickly opened the door, and the man turned his head and watched the guest walk past him. I realized his eyes followed the guest all the way through the lobby. This intensified my fear, as it felt like he was studying the person. A few minutes later, the man disappeared again. I checked the cameras and saw him standing outside one of the guest rooms on the first floor, truly, just standing there. It was at this point that I called the emergency line, 911. I told them he was outside a guest's room and I didn't know what he intended to do. The officers confirmed they were en route. I glued my eyes to the camera feed, and he stood by the door for about 3 minutes, then slowly returned to the lobby. When he came back, this time he walked directly to the reception desk and leaned over the counter. He looked at me and asked if there was any food available. His voice was very soft and disturbing. I told him the vending machines were in the corner. He gave a small smile and walked away. I just sat, stared at the clock, and prayed for the police to arrive. Finally, around 4:10 a.m., 2 officers arrived. I opened the door for them and immediately pointed him out. He had returned to the sitting area and was seated. They went over and spoke with him for a few minutes. They asked for his ID and questioned him about things I couldn't hear. Then, they escorted him outside. One of the officers returned and explained that the man was not a guest at all. The credit card he had given me was stolen, and he had no luggage or registered reservation. He had simply pretended to be a guest to gain access to the building. They charged him with trespassing and using a stolen card. After they left, I shook uncontrollably until my shift ended. Every time I looked at the cameras, I expected to see him again. What disturbed me the most was learning that he had been inside the hotel for hours, wandering, standing outside guest rooms, and watching me from various vantage points, all while he shouldn't have been there. I don't know what his plan was, but I know it wasn't good. That night was the most frightening of my life. Part 2, The Gas Station. Narrator, Meredith. My name is Meredith, I am 24 years old, and I work the night shift at a small gas station on a remote county road. Our station is the kind of place most people don't even notice unless they've run out of gas or are completely lost. I chose this job because it was calm and predictable. I like that, or at least I used to. The incident started one Thursday night, around 1 a.m. The air outside was heavy and still, and the constant buzz of the overhead lights was getting on my nerves all shift. I was just about to microwave a cinnamon roll that I didn't even really want when the door chime sounded. A man walked in, middle-aged, perhaps in his late 40s. He wore a green coat, had disheveled hair, and dry lips, as if he hadn't smiled in years. Unlike most people, he didn't head for the coffee or chips. He just stood near the counter, staring at me with a strange sense of familiarity. With a polite smile, I said, "Hello." The man then asked, "Do you always work this late?" I blinked and replied, Yes, most of the time." He smiled. Then he said, "I figured. I've driven by here a few times. I noticed it's always you." This bothered me more than I let on. I said, Yes, well, it's a small town." He didn't leave. "Meredith, is that right?" I froze. I wasn't wearing a name tag. I wanted to ask how he knew, but he went on to say that I had beautiful handwriting and pointed to the whiteboard where I had written, "Cinnamon coffee is back." Eyes with circles. You use small lines. It's very specific and thoughtful. I didn't answer. He didn't buy anything. He just stood there for another minute, watching me, as if he were studying my reactions. Then, he finally nodded. He said, "I'm Paul. Just curious. That's all." And then he walked out into the fog. After that, he started showing up randomly. Not every night, not enough to call him an outright stalker, but frequently enough that I stopped assuming it was a coincidence. Sometimes he came inside. Sometimes he just sat in his car at the edge of the parking lot with his lights off. One night, I tried to ignore him. He came in, bought a bottle of water, and took his time leaving, as always. He said, "You're quieter tonight." I muttered, "It's a long shift." He slowly looked around the store, as if taking inventory of everything. "You must feel lonely. Just you here in the dark. No one for miles." "I'm fine." He leaned on the counter. "Don't you ever worry, being a woman alone out here at night?" His tone wasn't threatening, and that made it worse. It was inquisitive, neutral, as if he were asking about the weather. I pulled back and asked, "Do you need anything else?" He tilted his head. "You always keep the backroom door locked." "That's smart. I notice you check it almost every night around 2 a.m. My heart sank. I didn't reply. With a soft, almost apologetic smile, he said, "I'll let you get back to your work. I didn't mean to upset you." Then he walked out again. After that night, I held my keys between my knuckles when walking to my car. I put a tire iron under the counter. I changed the curtains in my apartment. I even locked the bathroom door while showering, even if I was the only one home. There were nights he didn't come. Sometimes I wouldn't see him for a whole week, but that didn't help. It actually made it worse, because I never knew when he'd reappear. Like the time I returned from a 10-minute break and saw a Polaroid photograph on the counter. It was a picture of me. I was refilling the windshield washer fluid bucket behind the pumps. The picture was taken that same night, and very close up. There was no note with the photo, but the small line used to dot the I in my handwriting, and the word washer on the bucket, were circled in red ink. The next time he came, I told him to leave. I told him I would call the police if he stayed. Paul just nodded. I understand. I was too direct. With a voice that trembled, which I hated, I said, "You were stalking me." He said, "I just think you are the kind of person who is used to being misunderstood. I thought perhaps you'd appreciate someone who pays attention." That's not attention. That's obsession. He didn't flinch. Would it be easier if I smiled and brought in a soda every night? Would I be more normal if I only talked about sports and pretended not to notice that your shoes are always half a size too big, or that your left eyelid twitches when you're tired? At that moment, I started dialing 911. He didn't stop me. The police arrived quickly, and he offered no resistance. He just stood there with his arms hanging loosely, waiting. They searched his car and found a notebook full of dates and times. It was my work schedule. Notes on my walk, my clothes, and my purchases. One page had my name written over and over in increasingly tight circles until it became a scribble. He kept telling the police the same thing, "I just noticed things. I'm just a curious man." The restraining order was issued that same week. I don't work the night shifts anymore. I don't even live in the same town. The company transferred me to another station 2 hours away. But even now, when I drive home and see headlights lingering behind me for too long, I get a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. And sometimes, I still think about the way he said my name. As if he already knew what it would sound like in his mouth. As if he had practiced it. Part 3, The Two Suspicious Cars at the Gas Station. Narrator, the new coworker. I want to preface this by saying this happened to me last night. I work the night shift at a 24-hour gas station. I'm a 22-year-old woman and have only been working here for about 2 months. I cover the weekend shifts, Thursday through Saturday, while another coworker, who I'll call Max, covers Sunday through Wednesday. Max and his friend, who I'll call Ben, came in around 2:30 a.m. for coffee and to say hello. Max and his friend had ingested magic mushrooms a few hours earlier, so when I saw them, they were full of laughter and jokes. Honestly, it was pure entertainment for me. As we were chatting, Ben mentioned that there was a car parked in the lot with its lights off but the engine running, which had been there before they arrived. He said when he questioned the driver, the man replied that he was waiting for a food delivery order. It wouldn't normally be strange for delivery drivers to wait for us to prepare an order. But the strange part was that I hadn't received any orders for almost 2 hours. I spend most of the shift in the back of the store, away from the registers and entrances doing cleanup, so I couldn't even see the parking lot. We dismissed the issue, and the two went outside to smoke and play with Max's dog, which they had brought along. At first, I didn't give it much thought, but when I was alone, I felt it was a little odd, as I didn't know how long they had been out there before my coworker arrived. About an hour later, they came back in for more coffee. At this point, Max elaborated that the car was parked in a spot where I couldn't see it, even from the register, due to a wall. He said that for the entire hour they were outside playing with his dog and smoking, the man inside the car was constantly shifting between watching them and looking at his phone, as if texting someone. When Ben noticed this, in his heightened state of altered perception, he walked up to the car and asked, "What's up? Why are you watching us?" At that moment, the man tried to pretend he didn't speak English. When that didn't work, he switched to English and started saying he must have gotten the address wrong, before quickly speeding out of the parking lot. Ben was definitely more euphoric than Max, but what was truly terrifying was that Max said the car looked brand new and had no license plates. He also noticed a pile of blankets in the back seat, enough to conceal a person, and as they confronted the man, another car with its lights off pulled into the lot, a car that also looked new and had no license plates, and immediately followed the first car as it drove away. Max stayed for another 15 minutes, then they left, telling me to be careful and stay aware. Around 6 a.m., he came back for more coffee, completely sober, so we talked more about it. He said the man had been acting extremely suspicious the entire time they were outside, constantly checking his phone and looking at them, the parking lot entrance, and the store doors. Even he admitted he was scared, and once his euphoria wore off, he wanted to check on me to make sure I was okay. We both concluded that had they not been there, this scenario could have unfolded in several ways. I don't know if this was a complete coincidence, or if those two cars intended to do something to me once Max and Ben left and I was alone. I might carry a knife for self-defense, but my gut tells me, based on what they described, that if there were multiple people, I probably wouldn't have fared well, and if they hadn't been there, playing like kids in the parking lot, something terrible might have happened to me. I'm working again tonight, and if anything happens, I will let you know. Continuation of Part 3, Narrator, the same new coworker. I truly wish I didn't have an update, but I do. The car returned on my shift. This is how it happened. It was around 3 a.m., and I was mopping the floors when 4 men walked in for coffee and snacks. I was ringing them up when one of them asked if I knew anything about a car at the end of the parking lot, running with its lights off. I looked at the man and asked, "Which car?" Nothing else happened for the rest of the shift, but I was certainly extra cautious when I had to go outside to change the trash cans at the pumps. What's most frightening to me is that I never saw the car myself, but multiple people have warned me about it. At first, I hoped I was just being paranoid and that nothing was really happening, but seeing the exact same car on 2 consecutive nights at nearly the same hour, parked in a blind spot from the register or front windows, makes me think my paranoia is justified. If so, I'm grateful that another group of people arrived to keep me from being alone, in case those men in the car had decided to come inside. Fortunately, I don't work for a few days, and I can only hope that when I return to work, the car doesn't reappear. Part 4, The Bell Nightmare at the Motel, Narrator, Daniel. My name is Daniel, I am 29 years old, and I work the night shift at a small rural motel. It's not a chain, just a family-owned place with 2 floors and about 25 rooms in total. My working hours are usually from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The motel doesn't get much traffic at night, perhaps an occasional check-in after midnight if someone is traveling, but most of the time, it's completely silent. I chose this job for that reason. I am not very sociable, so sitting in an empty building for most of the night suits me well. The motel structure includes a main office with the reception desk, a few chairs, a coffee machine, and a small brochure rack. Behind the desk, there is a hallway that leads to a back office. That back office is a kind of staff lounge. It has another desk, a sofa, a mini fridge, and a TV mounted on the wall. The key thing is that there's a small speaker in there that chimes whenever someone rings the bell on the reception desk. Nothing else happened for the rest of the shift, but I was certainly extra cautious when I had to go outside to change the trash cans at the pumps. What's most frightening to me is that I never saw the car myself, but multiple people have warned me about it. At first, I hoped I was just being paranoid and that nothing was really happening, but seeing the exact same car on 2 consecutive nights at nearly the same hour, parked in a blind spot from the register or front windows, makes me think my paranoia is justified. This incident happened one Tuesday night in the fall. The weather was cold, perhaps below 50 degrees Fahrenheit, and the parking lot was empty except for 4 or 5 guests' cars. It was about 2 a.m. when I first heard the bell chime. I got up from the sofa in the back and entered the main office. When I arrived, no one was behind the desk. The lobby was empty. I looked out through the glass doors, but the road was dark and appeared deserted. There were no cars approaching or headlights visible. My name is Daniel, I am 29 years old, and I work the night shift at a small rural motel. It's not a chain, just a family-owned place with 2 floors and about 25 rooms in total. My working hours are usually from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The motel doesn't get much traffic at night, perhaps an occasional check-in after midnight if someone is traveling, but most of the time, it's completely silent. I sat back down on the sofa, took out my phone, and browsed for a while. 10 minutes later, the bell chimed again. I jumped up and quickly went into the main office, but once again, it was empty. The motel structure includes a main office with the reception desk, a few chairs, a coffee machine, and a small brochure rack. Behind the desk, there is a hallway that leads to a back office. That back office is a kind of staff lounge. It has another desk, a sofa, a mini fridge, and a TV mounted on the wall. The key thing is that there's a small speaker in there that chimes whenever someone rings the bell on the reception desk. I returned inside, and that's when I decided to do something different. Instead of going back to the lounge, I sat directly behind the reception desk. If someone was sneaking in and ringing the bell to play a trick on me, I wanted to be there to catch them. I dimmed the lobby lights slightly, so the room was in semi-darkness, and I just sat and listened. It was so quiet that every small sound made me flinch. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual. The refrigerator in the back office turned on and buzzed. Every few minutes, the building would creak as it settled. Just as I was letting myself relax and doze off, it happened. The bell chimed, only this time, I saw what made it ring. A pale hand reached up from underneath the reception desk, curved over the counter, and pressed the bell right in front of me. I leaped up so fast I'm sure the chair nearly toppled over, and I sprinted down the hallway into the back office. I slammed the door shut and locked it, standing there in the darkness. My chest was pounding. My mind was trying to comprehend how someone could be under the desk. The space under the counter isn't much, but it's enough for a person to crouch and squeeze into. This meant he had been hiding just a few feet away from me, waiting. I forced myself to look at the security monitors. There were 4 cameras, one on the lobby, one on the hallway, and 2 on the parking lot. In the lobby feed, I saw the chair was clearly overturned from my hasty retreat. The counter looked empty. Then, in the bottom corner of the frame, I saw movement. A head emerged from behind the desk. I couldn't make out details, just the outline and the glint of his eyes staring directly into the camera. I stepped away from the monitor. I couldn't look at it. I grabbed my phone and called 911 with shaking hands. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone had infiltrated and was hiding in the lobby. She told me to stay put and that officers were on the way. While on the phone, I watched the monitor. The person's head disappeared, and then I saw the individual crawling out from behind the desk on all 4s. He crawled toward the door, then stood up. He was tall and wore a hoodie pulled tight, hunched over. Then he turned and started pacing the lobby, as if searching for something, and then he turned and exited the camera frame towards the hallway that led to the back office. I pressed my back against the locked door. A moment later, the doorknob jiggled. Just once, a very slow jiggle, and then nothing. The dispatcher kept asking if I was safe, but for a few seconds, I couldn't answer because my throat was tight. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the faint sound of footsteps moving away. I rushed back to the monitor. The man was walking in the lobby again. At one point, he stood in front of the glass doors and just looked outside, as if waiting for someone. Then, he walked to the brochure rack and started flipping through the papers, as if tauntingly killing time. The minutes dragged on. Finally, I saw the flashing blue and red lights through the parking lot cameras. The police pulled up. 2 cars. The man must have seen them too, because he suddenly exited the frame. A second later, I heard the front doors open. When the officers swept the building, they found a large rock near the front door, likely used to keep the door propped open, but they didn't find him inside. He was gone. They searched the parking lot, checked the road, and the officer told me whoever it was had fled immediately upon their arrival. I kept replaying that scene in my mind. The way that hand reached up from under the desk and rang the bell, with utter composure. I hope you enjoyed this content. For more videos, subscribe to our channel and activate the bell. Goodbye.